Have you ever felt this quiet but powerful resistance? That strange tension in your chest when the doorbell rings. Someone's outside. They want to come in. Maybe it's a neighbor, a friend, someone you even like. They just want to visit, to chat, to be friendly. But something deep inside you tightens. You feel an odd discomfort, like your whole body is saying, no. You're not angry. You're not rude. You don't hate people. In fact, in the right moment, you can enjoy deep conversations. You laugh, you care, you show up for the people in your life. But when it comes to unexpected visits, especially in your home, something feels off. It's like their presence is asking you to give something you don't have. Energy, focus, performance. If that sounds familiar, take a deep breath. Because today, we're going to talk about something few people openly admit. A topic that's more common than you might think, but rarely discussed without shame. This is a conversation about those of us who feel deeply unsettled when someone enters our personal space. And not because we're antisocial, but because our inner world operates differently. You see, not wanting visitors isn't always about bad manners or social anxiety. According to Carl Jung, one of the most important thinkers in psychology, this could point to something deeper, something meaningful and even necessary for your psychological growth. In this video, we're diving into 6 powerful insights from Jung that may completely shift the way you see this discomfort. So stick with me until the end. Because if you've ever felt guilty for wanting to be left alone, today might be the day you stop apologizing for something that's been part of your nature all along. And hey, before we get into it, take a second to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment. Have you ever felt that strange tension when someone knocks on your door out of nowhere? I'd love to know, because you're definitely not alone in this. Let's start with a question. Why do some people light up during social events, group dinners, or even surprise visits, while others, like you, feel drained by the mere thought of it? Maybe you enjoy people. You like talking. You love your friends. But when someone wants to step into your space, into your home, something inside you flinches. You recoil, even if you smile through it. And you're not imagining this reaction. There's actually a reason behind it. Carl Jung, who laid the foundation for modern analytical psychology, gave us the language to understand this. He introduced 2 core types of psychological orientation, introverted and extroverted. But here's where it gets interesting. When Jung used those words, he wasn't talking about whether someone is shy or outgoing. This wasn't about social behavior at all. He was talking about energy. Psychic energy. Extroverts, according to Jung, direct their energy outward. They're energized by the world around them, people, activity, movement, interaction. They gain power from external stimulation. Introverts. They're wired differently. Their energy flows inward. They recharge not through company, but through solitude. Silence. Introspection. So when someone unexpectedly enters their space, bringing conversation, noise, a shift in energy, it can feel like a shock to the system. The mind doesn't shut down from dislike. It shuts down from overload. And that's the first major insight. Not wanting to receive visitors isn't a personal defect. It's a reflection of your energetic structure. If you're more introverted, and many people are, even if they don't label themselves that way, your home isn't just where you live. It's a sacred space. A kind of cocoon where your inner life reorganizes, heals, breathes. When someone enters that space, even with the kindest intentions, they're walking through invisible threads you've carefully arranged throughout your day. And whether they mean to or not, they disrupt that pattern. Suddenly, your brain is no longer in rest mode. You activate your social persona, your mask. And that shift, that's exhausting. It's not personal. It's psychological necessity. Jung once said that introversion is not a choice. It's not a preference you picked like a favorite color. It's a disposition of the soul. Trying to force yourself to operate like someone who thrives on constant company? That leads to burnout, anxiety, even inner conflict. Because it's not you. And let's talk about how others might interpret this. Maybe someone has said to you, "You're so closed off. You're too reserved. You should be more welcoming." But they don't see what's happening beneath the surface. What looks like coldness is often self-protection. A quiet shield your unconscious mind puts in place to preserve your inner balance. Jung called this the shadow. The shadow is a fascinating part of Jungian psychology. It's not just your dark side. It's all the parts of yourself you've pushed down, hidden, or never fully understood. Your insecurities, past wounds, suppressed emotions, even your potential. And here's the truth. When someone enters your home, they're not just sitting in your living room. They're stepping into a psychic field, yours. A place where your inner self is most unguarded. Where your thoughts and emotions are raw, honest, unfiltered. And that's where the shadow starts to stir. Have you ever had this moment? Someone's over. You're chatting, being polite, smiling. But deep down, you're growing more and more uncomfortable. You can't even explain it. The person didn't do anything wrong. And yet, something about their presence unsettles you. That's the shadow being touched. Their voice, their energy, maybe even just the way they move or speak, it brushes against something unspoken within you. An old emotion, a fear, a memory, something you haven't consciously dealt with. And your system reacts, not with logic, but with instinct. You want them gone. You want to close the door. You want yourself back. Jung said, "What you do not bring into consciousness will appear in your life as fate." And sometimes, that fate shows up as discomfort during a simple visit. A random interaction that suddenly drains you, makes you restless, makes you question yourself. But here's the freeing part, you're not broken. You're not rude. You're not strange. You're sensitive to psychic energy. You feel the presence of others on a deeper level than most. And when that presence disrupts your inner balance, your psyche responds. And here's something else Jung taught that's often overlooked. The shadow doesn't just contain pain. It holds treasure, potential, talents, parts of yourself you've yet to embrace. But you can't access that in noise. Not while playing host. Not while smiling through another round of coffee and small talk when you're already running on empty. To find your truth, you need space. Silence. Time to be alone. Maybe you felt this, that sigh of relief when you close the door behind a guest. When you're finally alone again. You take off your shoes. You breathe. You just are. No performance. No persona. Just you. That moment isn't small. It's sacred. In Jungian terms, the home is more than a building. It's a symbol of the soul. Every room reflects part of your inner world. The bedroom holds your intimacy. The kitchen, your emotional nourishment. The basement, your unconscious. The attic, your higher thoughts. And the front door. That's the boundary between you and the outside world. When someone crosses that door, they bring more than themselves. They bring their thoughts, their emotions, their energy. And if you're someone going through the individuation process, the journey of becoming your true self, that presence can be incredibly disruptive. So if visits make you uneasy, if you crave solitude, you're not closing yourself off. You're protecting your energy. You're guarding the sacred space where your transformation happens. And that, right there, is part of the journey Jung believed was essential to becoming whole. Let me ask you something. Have you ever welcomed someone into your home, sat down for a friendly conversation, and smiled your way through it, even while your entire body was secretly begging for silence? You were polite. You offered coffee. You nodded, laughed at the right moments, asked questions. But inside, you felt like you were running on fumes. You couldn't wait for it to be over. And afterward, you felt two things, exhausted and guilty. If that resonates, you're not alone. So many people, especially introverts, empaths, and those on the path of self-discovery, experience this exact inner conflict. The world tells us we should always be welcoming, social, open. And when we're not, we assume something is wrong with us. But Carl Jung offers a powerful explanation for what's really happening. It all comes down to what he called the persona. The persona is your social mask, the version of yourself you wear to interact with the world. It's the you that shows up at work, answers emails, chats with your neighbor, joins group chats, hosts dinner. The persona isn't fake. It's not a lie. It's necessary. We all have it. It helps us function in society, build relationships, and navigate expectations. But, and here's the problem, it's not your whole self. It's only a piece. Often, the most acceptable, polished, filtered version of you. Jung warned that when we start identifying too strongly with this mask, when we believe we are the persona, we begin to lose touch with our true inner self. And when you're wearing that mask too long, especially in a space that should feel safe, like your own home, you start to disconnect. Not just from others, but from yourself. So imagine this. Your home. It's your sanctuary, your place of peace. You're finally unwinding. And then someone comes over. They mean well. They want to catch up, share a laugh. But the moment they walk through the door, your persona kicks in. You become the gracious host. You check if the lighting is too harsh. You worry if the dishes are still in the sink. You think about your tone, your facial expressions, whether you're being entertaining enough. You filter what you say. You smile even when you're tired. And this invisible performance, it drains your psychic energy every second. And here's the hard part, no one sees it happening. To them, you seem warm, engaged, normal. But deep down, you're running a marathon with no rest in sight. Jung explained that this dissonance, the gap between your true self and the persona, is where inner suffering is born. It creates what he called a loss of soul. Your soul cries out not because the visitor is bad, not because you're unkind, but because you're being pulled away from your center. You're being asked to act when all you really want is to be. This is why so many people feel a strange sadness after a visit, even if the interaction seemed fine. It's not about the conversation. It's about the cost of the mask. And for those who are deeply sensitive, the cost is high. You might even notice that after visits, you need long periods of recovery. You feel fatigued, overstimulated, and distant from yourself. That's not weakness. That's your psyche trying to recalibrate. Trying to bring you back to wholeness after being stretched thin. So what do we do about this? How do we live in a world that demands the persona while staying connected to our real self? Jung never said to destroy the persona. He believed it had a role. But he also warned, when the mask becomes your identity, your soul begins to suffocate. And this brings us to something many people live with silently, performing at home. Think about that for a second. Your home, the one place where you should feel fully yourself, has become another stage. Another place where you put on a show. For a lot of introverted or highly sensitive people, this is the core of their resistance to visitors. It's not about avoiding people. It's about not wanting to perform in your sacred space. When you're out in the world, you expect to wear the mask. You're prepared. But when you're at home, you want to take it off. You want to breathe. So when someone enters that space, and you're forced to switch back into social mode, you feel tension. You feel disoriented. Your nervous system kicks into a low-level stress response. And the more often this happens, the more you begin to associate visits with exhaustion. You may even start feeling anxious before someone arrives, or resentful during the visit, then guilty afterward. It's a vicious cycle. One that can only be broken by understanding and honoring your psychological reality. Here's a liberating truth. You don't have to apologize for needing space. You are allowed to protect your energy. You're allowed to say no to guests. You're allowed to prioritize your peace, even if that means skipping a gathering or not answering the door. Because every time you force yourself to be social when you're not ready, you abandon yourself. You send the message, often unconsciously, that your needs don't matter. But they do. So here's what Jung might say to you now. You have a right to be your full self in your own home. Not the smiley version. Not the agreeable version. Just you. Barefoot, quiet, staring out the window. Thinking. Breathing. Just being. That isn't laziness or selfishness. That's soul care. And here's another piece to consider. Many people wear their persona for so long, they don't even realize it's a mask anymore. They entertain guests. They show up to every dinner. They answer every call. They keep giving, giving, giving. But inside, they're empty, irritable, sad, tired. And worst of all, they don't know why. But now, maybe you do. Maybe this explains why you feel what you feel. Why you long for silence. Why you say, I just need a day alone, and mean it with every fiber of your being. Carl Jung believed that listening to these inner signals, these seemingly small discomforts, is how real transformation begins. Because the moment you say, no, thank you, I'm staying in tonight, you're not rejecting others. You're choosing yourself. You're choosing depth over performance. Truth over appearance. Wholeness over approval. And that choice, that's what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you really are, beneath all the roles and expectations. It doesn't happen in noise. It happens in silence. And sometimes, it begins with something as simple as not answering the door. She used to think loneliness was something to be feared, something dark and heavy that crept in during the silence. But the longer she stayed alone, the more she realized, silence isn't empty. It's full of answers. There's a moment that comes, quietly and without warning, when you realize you no longer need the noise. You don't need to check your phone to feel connected. You don't need to fill every blank hour with plans or people. You just are present. And for her, that was the beginning of everything. She stopped craving validation, not because she no longer valued relationships, but because she'd found something deeper, self-trust. It started with small things. Making her bed in the morning, not because someone might come over and see it, but because it made her feel calm. Cooking herself a beautiful dinner, lighting candles, playing music, not for a date night, not for a guest, but just for her. And it wasn't sad. It wasn't lonely. It was sacred. There's a strange kind of power in treating yourself like you matter, even when no one's watching. Especially when no one's watching. She noticed that most people weren't used to that. When she told them she lived alone, they tilted their heads. But don't you get lonely? They'd ask. And she'd smile gently. Not really. Because what they were really asking was, aren't you afraid of yourself? But she wasn't. Not anymore. Because being alone had taught her something that years of relationships hadn't. That peace isn't the absence of others, it's the presence of yourself. There was a day, early on, when she broke down in the middle of the kitchen floor. She had just finished unpacking the last box. The apartment was still echoing with unfamiliarity. She sat down, exhausted, surrounded by the quiet. No partner, no family nearby, no roommate to laugh with. Just her. And for a second, it felt unbearable. The aloneness. The sharp edge of it. But then she breathed. Slowly, deeply. She looked around at the space she'd created. The shelves she had organized. The plants she had watered. The books she had chosen. The walls she had painted. And something shifted. This wasn't emptiness. This was space. Space to build. Space to rest. Space to discover who she was when no one was shaping her. That night, she sat by the window with a glass of wine and wrote in her journal. I thought I'd be lonely. But I'm not. I'm just with myself. And maybe that's not lonely at all. The next morning, she woke up to sunlight on her face and realized she had slept better than she had in months. No anxiety. No pressure. Just peace. It didn't mean life got easier overnight. There were still days of doubt. Days when she missed companionship. Days when the silence felt a little too loud. But instead of running from it, she started listening. She learned to ask herself things she'd never bothered to ask before. What do I want to do today? What kind of life feels good to me? Who am I when no one's asking me to be anything else? And with each answer came a tiny act of rebellion. A soft revolution. She stopped performing. She started dressing for herself, reading books she actually liked, saying no to things that drained her. She stopped pretending to enjoy parties when she'd rather be home with a cup of tea. She let herself be quiet in a world that's constantly shouting. And people noticed. Some admired her. Others didn't understand her. A few even felt threatened by her peace, because when a woman stops apologizing for her solitude, it forces people to examine their own discomfort with being alone. But she didn't need to be understood anymore. She understood herself. There was a freedom in that. She'd always been told that freedom looked like travel, adventure, risk-taking. But the most radical kind of freedom, she discovered, was simply not needing anyone else to complete you. She could sit in her home, surrounded by silence, and feel whole. She didn't wait for phone calls. She didn't check for messages that never came. She didn't long for someone else to make her feel seen. She saw herself. She saw the strength it took to build a life from scratch. The courage it took to walk away from things that no longer served her. The resilience it took to face herself and love what she saw. She had become the kind of woman who didn't just survive solitude, she thrived in it. Not because she hated people. Not because she had given up on love. But because she had finally learned to give herself the love she had spent years searching for in others. There was a calm in her now. A softness. A grounded presence that came from within. She didn't chase chaos. She didn't beg for attention. She didn't force anything. And yet, somehow, everything meaningful began to find her. New friendships formed, not out of desperation, but alignment. Romantic interest came, not as a rescue mission, but as a meeting of equals. She wasn't seeking a savior. She didn't want to be someone's project or puzzle. She wanted to be seen as she was, whole, complex, already enough. And for the first time, she believed she was worthy of that. So when she walks through the city now, alone, confident, unhurried, she's not lonely. She's liberated. Because she knows that coming home to yourself is the bravest, most beautiful journey a woman can take. And the world finally makes sense. She never planned on becoming the woman who lives alone. It wasn't some dramatic declaration of independence. It wasn't revenge after heartbreak. It wasn't even a statement. It was just something that slowly happened. One decision at a time. One boundary at a time. One quiet truth after another. She didn't wake up one morning and say, "This is the life I want." But eventually, she woke up and realized, this is the life she had created. And it fit perfectly. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't glamorous. But it was hers. There was a kind of invisible magic in that. A slow, unfolding contentment. The kind of joy that doesn't scream, but hums, steady and warm beneath everything. She had learned to stop waiting. Waiting for the right time. Waiting for the perfect partner. Waiting for permission. Waiting for the world to tell her she could begin. She simply began. She bought herself flowers. She made weekend plans with herself. She stopped looking over her shoulder for approval. And without realizing it, she had rewritten the rules. Not the world's rules, her rules. What success meant. What happiness looked like. What kind of life was worth living. It no longer had to be loud. It no longer had to be filled with constant socializing or milestones checked off for the sake of appearances. It just had to feel true. And the truth was, she was thriving in her own rhythm. A slow morning coffee in a robe that smelled like lavender. A walk in the evening air without a destination. A playlist full of songs that reminded her of no one but herself. She began to measure her days not in productivity or validation, but in presence. Was she kind to herself today? Did she feel at peace in her own company? Did her life feel aligned with her values, not someone else's agenda? More and more, the answer was yes. That didn't mean she closed herself off from the world. Far from it. In fact, the deeper she went into solitude, the more open she became. Because when you're no longer trying to be chosen, you begin to choose. She chose who got access to her time. She chose conversations that nourished instead of drained. She chose stillness over chaos. She no longer made space for things that made her feel small. It was funny how clarity came with quiet. One evening, she sat in her apartment watching the sun dip behind the buildings. The light pooled softly across the walls. There was no TV on, no music, just the gentle hum of life outside her window, and the soft rustle of her cat curling up beside her. And she realized, nothing was missing. It didn't mean her life was perfect. She still had moments of doubt, restlessness, longing. She still wondered what it might feel like to share this peace with someone else. But those thoughts didn't unravel her anymore. She could want connection without abandoning herself. She could desire love without chasing it. She could hold space for both solitude and intimacy, without needing to sacrifice one for the other. This was the freedom no one had explained to her. That you don't have to harden to be alone. You don't have to turn cold. You don't have to shut down your heart. In fact, the more she softened into herself, the more powerful she became. People felt it when they were around her. They couldn't always name it, but they could sense it. She was rooted, not in control of everything, but in relationship with herself. And from that place, everything else changed. She no longer accepted half effort from anyone, because she no longer gave herself anything less than full respect. She no longer entertained relationships that felt like a transaction, because she was already full, not desperate to be filled. She no longer explained her choices, because she had nothing to prove. This wasn't arrogance. This was alignment. She understood now that love is not something you earn by being pleasing or perfect. It's something that grows where truth is safe. And she had made her life a safe place for truth. Some people drifted away. They didn't know how to engage with her anymore without the old patterns. They missed the version of her who overgave, over-apologized, over-explained. But she didn't miss that version. She could love who she was then, while choosing not to be her anymore. Growth isn't rejection. It's release. She didn't need to hold everything and everyone to prove she had a good heart. She just needed to hold herself. And when she did, when she finally did, it changed everything. There's a quiet kind of woman who moves through the world now. She's not trying to be the center of attention. She's not building an empire of followers. She's not desperate to be desired. But people notice her. Because she's free. Free in a way most people don't know how to be. Free from performance. Free from pretending. Free from the constant ache of trying to be enough. And it's not because she figured it all out. It's because she allowed herself to go inward, deeply, honestly, and stay there long enough to learn who she really was. And once she learned that, she could never again trade her peace for someone else's comfort. She knew too much, felt too much, loved too deeply, including herself. So she walks alone, yes. But she is not lost. She is not incomplete. She is not waiting to be rescued. She is walking home, again and again, to herself. And every time she opens the door, she finds a life that welcomes her back like an old friend. There was something beautiful about the rituals she had created. Small, almost invisible to the outside world, but sacred to her. Like how she always lit a candle before dinner, even if it was just soup and toast. How she talked out loud to herself while folding laundry, not because she was lonely, but because her voice deserved to be heard. How she paused before bed each night to ask herself, did I honor my spirit today? These weren't acts of indulgence. They were acts of remembrance. She wasn't performing for anyone anymore. She was simply being with herself. And in doing so, she began to rewrite what womanhood meant to her. Not the kind the world handed her, the version that said she should be accommodating, smiling, always saying yes. Not the version built on sacrifice and silence, but the kind rooted in presence, in wholeness, in truth. She wasn't trying to be soft or strong. She was just being real. And that realness had a weight to it, one that people could feel when they entered her space. There was a quiet defiance in the way she chose peace. Because peace, for a woman, is a radical act, especially in a world that benefits from her being exhausted, overextended, and emotionally available to everyone but herself. So she redefined what it meant to give. She gave herself time before she gave others answers. She gave herself permission to not explain her no. She gave her heart space to be tender without being taken. This new kind of strength wasn't loud. It didn't come in declarations or ultimatums. It came in a calm certainty. I belong to myself now. And once she understood that, she stopped trying to belong to everyone else. She no longer asked, will they like me? She asked, do I feel like myself around them? She stopped wondering if her life made sense to others. She wondered instead, does it feel like home to me? Because that's what she was building now, not a picture-perfect life for others to admire, but a real, lived-in home for her soul. A home that didn't demand constant productivity. A home that allowed rest, creativity, solitude, and softness. And slowly, the old guilt began to fade. The guilt of choosing quiet over plans. The guilt of saying no without a reason. The guilt of being a woman who wasn't available to fix or please or perform. She didn't owe her life to anyone else's expectations. She didn't have to shrink just because someone else was uncomfortable with her expansion. Her freedom was not a threat, it was an invitation. To do things differently. To live from truth instead of fear. To find value in being, not just doing. And some people got it. They saw her peace and respected it. They didn't need her to explain herself. Others didn't. They mistook her solitude for sadness. They couldn't imagine a woman being alone and being okay. As if loneliness and aloneness were the same thing. But she knew the difference. Loneliness is the ache of self-abandonment. Aloneness is the gift of self-return. She had stopped abandoning herself. She no longer rushed into relationships just to fill a void. She no longer performed femininity to be palatable. She no longer clung to people who didn't choose her with the same openness she offered. Because she had already chosen herself. Every day. In every decision. In every soft boundary and bold truth. And from that place, love looked different. Love wasn't something to chase or negotiate for. It was something to receive when it was aligned. She didn't have to beg for it anymore. If someone didn't meet her with presence, they simply didn't stay. No drama. No resentment. Just clarity. Because she had outgrown emotional scarcity. She had learned that being alone is not the worst thing. Living disconnected from yourself is. And she had spent too many years making herself smaller to fit into someone else's version of love. She was done with that. Now, love would have to meet her where she was. Whole, full, honest. Not perfect, but present. She didn't expect love to save her. She expected it to walk beside her. And if it didn't come, she was okay. Because she wasn't living in waiting anymore. Her life was already in motion. Already rich with meaning, softness, growth, and light. The woman who lives alone is not hiding. She's not broken. She's not lost. She is becoming. Every quiet morning. Every mindful choice. Every breath taken in her own time. And perhaps one day, she will share her space. Her stories. Her mornings. Her life. But not to complete her. Only to add to what's already whole. Until then, she is not holding her breath. She is not checking her phone. She is not waiting to be seen. She is living. Fully. Quietly. Deeply. In a life that reflects who she really is, not who she was told to be. And that, in itself, is a revolution. The seasons continued to shift around her. And just like the trees outside her window, she began to see beauty in letting go. Letting go of the stories that once defined her. Letting go of the roles she thought she had to play. Letting go of the illusion that her life needed to follow a familiar path to be meaningful. She had discovered that real transformation doesn't come with fanfare. It's not a loud moment, it's a quiet decision. A gentle reorientation. 1,000 small choices that whisper, I trust myself now. And with each day, that trust deepened. She trusted her body to know when it needed rest. She trusted her intuition to guide her away from what drained her. She trusted her heart to open again, slowly, intentionally, on its own terms. There was no rush, no urgency, no inner deadline screaming that she was running out of time. Because she wasn't. She had stepped outside of that race. The one that said, you should be married by now. You should have children by now. You should be more successful by now. She had unsubscribed from those narratives. They were never hers to begin with. And as she stood outside of them, she realized how many people were still trapped inside. Still measuring their worth by timelines and milestones that didn't fit their souls. She felt compassion for them, but not a desire to return. She didn't envy the noise. She had found the music in silence. And the silence, she realized, was never empty. It was full of presence, of creativity, of her own becoming. There were days, of course, when the ache returned. Not a longing for someone, exactly, but a longing for someone who understood. Who didn't need her to shrink. Who wouldn't mistake her solitude for sadness. Who would know that her quiet was not a void, but a sanctuary, and maybe, someday that person would appear. But she wasn't sculpting her life to make space for them. She was sculpting her life to make space for herself. Because for the first time, she felt truly seen, by the only person who could ever offer her the depth of recognition she craved. Herself. She had become her own mirror, her own anchor, her own safe place. And from that wholeness, everything else could bloom. She began to create again, not for money, not for approval, not for productivity, but for joy. She painted. She wrote long letters she never sent. She planted herbs on her windowsill and whispered their names like spells. She turned ordinary days into rituals. She walked barefoot in the garden just to feel the earth say, "You're here." She made tea at midnight and watched the moon until she forgot her own name. She started keeping a notebook of dreams, not the ones that happened while she slept, but the ones that arrived while she was wide awake. And each dream was a message. A remembering. A soft reminder that life didn't need to be loud to be meaningful. It only needed to be true. And hers finally was. She no longer performed happiness. She lived peace. She no longer chased meaning. She embodied it. And the most surprising thing of all? The more she stopped striving, the more life came to her. Not in the form of grand successes or fairy tale endings, but in the form of clarity, ease, depth, simplicity. She had learned that real success is not about being seen by the world. It's about being known by your own soul. And in that knowing, there is no loneliness. There is only space, and grace, and quiet joy. One morning, she stood by the window, watching a small bird land on the fence. No one else saw it. No one would ever know. But she did. She saw it. She smiled. And in that small, unnoticed moment, she felt the richness of her life. A life she had chosen. A life she had shaped. A life that asked for nothing but truth. No, she was not waiting for a man. She was not waiting for a sign. She was not waiting at all. She was living. Right here. Right now. In a quiet house filled with plants and books and warmth and breath. And in that space, that sacred, self-created space, she finally understood what freedom really means. It means belonging to yourself. Without apology. Without performance. Without permission. And she did. At last, she did.